Chapter 1. The Marriage of Convenience. Or so he thinks. Kieran Solvell never thought his life would end up like this. Married into one of the richest, most powerful Enigma families in the entire kingdom. The d'Harcourt were an old line of nobility, draped in wealth, influence, and the kind of political weight that could make a king hesitate before sneezing. And now, somehow, he was their alpha son-in-law. At first, he had thought it was a political arrangement. He was a quiet alpha scholar, the son of a respected but modest family, and Aurélien de Harcourt was the untouchable heir everyone whispered about. The marriage contract had been sealed in gilded ink, witnessed by half the court. But on their wedding night, Kieran realized he had gravely underestimated the elegant, calm, composed aristocrat he now called husband. Flashback. The wedding night. The chamber had smelled faintly of roses and cedarwood. Kieran remembered sitting on the edge of the bed, still in his ceremonial robes, muttering under his breath about how absurd this was. Aurélien had walked in still in layers of aristocratic finery, and with the same serene smile he always wore. "You look beautiful," Aurélien had murmured, voice rich and soft, eyes dark with something that made Kieran's ears burn. Kieran had scoffed, hiding his fluster. "Spare me your aristocratic flattery. I know this is all politics." But Aurélien had leaned down, kissed him so thoroughly his scholar brain short-circuited, and whispered against his lips, "I've loved you since the academy. Politics is the excuse. You are the reason." Kieran never remembered much after that, only the way his husband's usually elegant restraint burned away into unmasked devotion. That night, Aurélien had claimed him, not as a duty, but as someone he'd worship for the rest of his life. 2 years later. Peace, however, did not mean quiet. Their household was a battlefield of affection versus sarcasm. Kieran sneezed once in the library, once. Immediately, Aurélien's voice rang out, smooth but commanding. "Summon the apothecary." Kieran, clutching his quill, groaned. "I just sneezed, not died." Aurélien, already scribbling a note to the steward, didn't even blink. "Sneezes can be the precursor to fevers, and fevers can kill. I will not take the risk." "You're absurd." "Absurdly devoted," Aurélien corrected, pressing a kiss to the crown of his husband's head, as though that made everything reasonable. The apothecary arrived an hour later, bewildered to be asked to examine a perfectly healthy man who was now glaring daggers at his elegant husband. The steward, meanwhile, looked ready to resign. "My lord, this is the 5th time this week." "Then the apothecary should be used to it by now," Aurélien replied calmly. Kieran threw a pillow at him. Chaos and love. Their marriage was like this constantly, Kieran grumbling and rolling his eyes, Aurélien unbothered and determined to smother him in both luxury and obsession. Kieran couldn't walk through the market without guards trailing him like hawks. Couldn't have tea with a colleague without Aurélien appearing suddenly, his smile polite but his hand possessively at Kieran's waist. And though Kieran complained, blushed, and muttered about how overbearing Enigmas were, he always ended up allowing himself to be pulled into his husband's embrace at night, tangled in silk sheets and whispered confessions. If there was one thing Aurélien was, it was territorial. And if there was one thing Kieran was, it was too stubborn to admit he secretly liked being wanted that much. Seeds of misunderstanding. But peace, even chaotic peace, did not always last. It began subtly. Kieran noticed Aurélien slipping away some nights when he thought his husband was asleep. There were hushed conversations in the study, letters sealed before Kieran could glimpse the contents. Once he saw a servant carry in a parcel, only for Aurélien to snatch it personally, murmuring something low and dismissive when Kieran asked. At first, Kieran shrugged off. Aurélien was an aristocrat. Of course he had secrets. But when it kept happening, when the nights stretched long and cold without Aurélien in their bed, when whispers filled the corridors about late meetings, Kieran's sharp scholar's mind began piecing the worst together. A lover. He has someone else, or more than one. The thought lodged itself deep in his chest, poisoning every kiss, every smile, every touch. Kieran laughed it off when Aurélien fussed over him, but the laughter sounded brittle. He kissed back, but with hesitation. He mocked his husband's territorial clinginess, but behind his sarcasm, doubt gnawed at him. Aurelian didn't notice, or perhaps he did, but he thought Kieran was simply sulking in his usual tsundere manner. But for Kieran, the seed of misunderstanding had already been planted, and it was growing into something dangerous. Chapter 2. The Scholar Runs Away. Kieran Solvel had always considered himself a man of reason. He believed in logic, evidence, and scholarly deduction, which was why it hurt even more that all his evidence pointed to one very damning conclusion. His husband, Aurelian Darcour, was sneaking around at night, hiding parcels, whispering to servants, and leaving their bed cold. He must have another lover. The thought stabbed him again and again, until pride rose to smother the ache. Kieran was too stubborn, too proud, to ask directly. If his husband had betrayed him, then he would leave before being made a fool. The runaway scholar. One misty dawn, Kieran packed the bare essentials: 3 books, ink and quill, a loaf of bread, and, most importantly, his pride. He slipped out of the mansion gates disguised in a scholar's cloak. The guards didn't stop him. No one dared question Lord Darcour's alpha husband. By nightfall, he reached a monastery tucked against the cliffs, where monks welcomed him with mild confusion. "I wish to devote myself to study and silence," Kieran declared with dramatic flair, his robes flapping in the sea wind. The monks exchanged glances. Scholars were dramatic. They let him stay. The monastery chaos. Peace lasted exactly 1 hour. Kieran's first chore was to carry 2 buckets of water from the well. He lasted 30 steps before tripping spectacularly and dousing himself in freezing water. A monk sighed. Scholars. Later, he was asked to weed the garden. He managed to uproot the herbs and the weeds, leaving the patch a barren wasteland. Another monk sighed louder. Scholars. By evening, Kieran sat on the stone steps, muddy, wet, and miserable, glaring at his reflection in the water basin. "I escaped a possessive husband for this? Manual labor," he muttered. And yet, at night, lying on the thin straw mat, the bed felt colder. He turned to the side instinctively, expecting Aurelian's steady warmth, expecting that infuriating, elegant arm to snake around his waist, expecting the soft kisses pressed against the back of his neck. None of it came. Kieran buried his face in the thin pillow and cursed himself. "I don't miss him. I don't." His heart, however, throbbed otherwise. Meanwhile, at Darcour Manor, 2 days later, Aurelian returned from a council meeting, eager to spend the night tangled in silk sheets with his beloved Alpha, perhaps even coax him into laughter with whispered words and kisses. He entered their chambers, empty. No warm presence, no sarcastic muttering, no scent of his beloved Alpha. Aurelian's refined mask cracked. "Where is he?" His voice was soft, calm. Too calm. Servants scrambled. Guards stammered. No one had seen Lord Kieran since dawn 2 days ago. Aurelian's hand trembled once before he clenched it. The calm smile spread across his face, but his eyes, those elegant, aristocratic eyes, burned with fire. "My husband," he said evenly, "is missing. Then the whole kingdom shall help me find him." 3 days of madness. The next 3 days were chaos incarnate. Noble houses were stormed. Aurelian barged into banquets, yanking lords by their collars. "Where is my Alpha?" Bribes rained on guards until half the city's patrolmen were scouring every corner, trembling before the aristocrat who radiated elegance and barely restrained violence. Rumor spread faster than wildfire. Lord Darcour had gone mad. Some said his alpha husband had been kidnapped. Others whispered he was hunting down a lover's rival. The truth was simpler. Aurelian was feral without his beloved. Storming the monastery. On the 3rd day, the monastery bells rang out, but not for prayer. A carriage pulled up, black horses snorting as though sensing their master's fury. Aurelian stepped out, clad in midnight velvet, his coat embroidered with silver thread. He looked every inch the refined noble, except for his stormy expression that sent monks diving behind walls. Lord Darkour, the abbot stammered, bowing low. What brings you? My husband, Aurelian said smoothly, eyes scanning the courtyard, is here. The monks trembled. They couldn't deny it. Kieran, meanwhile, was in the garden, his hands dirty from failing at yet another chore, when he felt the chill crawl up his spine. He turned and nearly dropped dead on the spot. Aurelian? His husband stood there like a vengeful demon draped in velvet, eyes locked on him. Kieran immediately tried to retreat. This isn't what it looks like. Aurelian advanced, voice deceptively calm. You ran away. I needed some peace. You left our home. You were sneaking out at night. We'll discuss that later. Before Kieran could blink, Aurelian swept across the courtyard, seized him by the wrist, and pulled him flush against his chest. The monks gasped, scandalized. Kieran sputtered. You can't just drag me out of a holy monastery. Aurelian bent down, brushing his lips against Kieran's ear, voice low and dangerous. Watch me. And with that, he lifted his protesting alpha effortlessly into his arms, striding toward the gates as the monks crossed themselves and muttered, Enigmas. The kingdom had whispered that Lord Darkour was devoted. They were wrong. Devoted was too small a word. He was obsessed. Chapter 3. Bound Under the Moonlight. The ride back to the Darkour manor was nothing short of scandalous. Kieran, still squirming in his husband's arms, hissed like an angry cat while the coachman pretended to be deaf. Put me down, you arrogant, overgrown. No, Aurelian replied smoothly, his velvet coat brushing against Kieran's cheek. You left me for 3 days. You've lost the privilege of walking anywhere on your own. I am not your property. You are my husband, Aurelian corrected, voice dangerously calm. And you are mine. That is infinitely higher than property. Kieran's retort died in his throat because those aristocratic eyes weren't just angry. They were unhinged, desperate. Anniversary forgotten. That night, Aurelian ignored all protests. He carried his husband straight into their chambers and set him down on the silken bed. Kieran crossed his arms. You can't just storm monasteries and drag me out like a sack of potatoes. There are rules. Yes, Aurelian murmured, leaning down until his lips brushed the alpha's temple. And tonight, I am rewriting them. The candles flickered. The moonlight spilled through the windows. And somewhere in the middle of Aurelian's feverish kisses, Kieran remembered something. Today was their second wedding anniversary. He opened his mouth to mention it, only to have Aurelian's mouth claim his again, breathless and fierce, his hands sliding possessively across Kieran's skin. By the time Kieran could breathe again, the thought had fled. The marking. Aurelian was unlike himself that night. Usually, he was elegant restraint, polished control, the epitome of refined nobility. But not now. Now, he kissed Kieran like a starving man, leaving trails of fire down his neck. His hands gripped tightly, his body pressing close, joining them together. He was inside his husband, each thrust making Kieran a moaning mess. Kieran, he whispered against his throat, voice ragged. 2 years of our marriage, and you still try to leave me. I cannot allow it. Before Kieran could argue, sharp teeth sank into the delicate skin of his scent gland. Kieran gasped, half in pain, half in shock, clinging to his husband's shoulders. Heat spread through him, a bond sealing with every heartbeat, every pulse. The mark burned, seared, but with it came the undeniable knowledge. He was now fully bound to Aurelian. Aurelian pulled back, lips stained, eyes glowing with dark satisfaction. He licked the fresh mark reverently before murmuring, That, my beloved, is my second anniversary gift to you. You bit me like a dog, Kieran snapped, voice breaking somewhere between outrage and breathless moan. Dogs are loyal, Aurelian said with a smirk, lowering his mouth to kiss the mark again. You will never leave me now. And then, scandalously, shockingly, Aurelian knotted him. Kieran's eyes flew wide with pain. You never... Not outside my rut, Aurelian growled against his skin. But tonight is different. Tonight, you are mine. Forever. I will knot you as many times as it takes to remind you. The protest melted into gasps, into cries muffled against silk sheets, until the night was nothing but the sound of devotion disguised as obsession. Aftermath, the territorial hold. When it was over, Kieran lay exhausted, flushed, his husband's arms locked around him like steel bands. Aurelian pressed endless kisses to his marked neck, possessive and tender all at once. His voice was low, velvet over steel. Now you cannot leave me. Even if you wish to, I will never allow it. You are mine, Kieran. My alpha. My everything. Kieran's heart pounded. His mind told him to be outraged, but his body curled closer on instinct, craving the warmth. Maybe, just maybe, he didn't hate his husband's feral, unrefined side after all. The revenge plot. By morning, however, his sarcasm returned full force. Kieran stretched sorely, wincing as the fresh bite throbbed. He poked Aurelian's chest with a finger. You nearly took my throat off. Aurelian, utterly unrepentant, kissed the mark again. Perfect placement. You're insane. Madly in love, Aurelian corrected. Kieran narrowed his eyes, muttering, I'll get my revenge, mark my words. Aurelian chuckled. You already marked mine. Kieran flushed, sputtering nonsense, while his elegant husband leaned back against the pillows with a satisfied smirk, the kind of smirk that promised he was more than ready to be bitten back. Chapter 4. The Aftermath, Pregnancy, Chaos. The day after. Kieran woke the next morning sore, thoroughly marked and thoroughly trapped. Every time he shifted, Aurelian's arm tightened around his waist like an aristocratic steel chain. He tried once, just once, to slip out of bed, only for Aurelian's elegant voice to murmur, still half asleep. Don't move. I need to use the bathroom. I'll carry you. You're ridiculous. You're mine, Aurelian replied smoothly, pulling him back down into the sheets. And thus began Kieran's new life, house arrest by way of marital obsession. Anniversary gifts. Later that evening, Kieran discovered that Aurelian had remembered their anniversary after all. Aurelian led him into a private chamber where stacks of velvet-wrapped packages awaited. Books bound in rare leather, quills forged with silver, a handcrafted desk, and even an hourglass filled with starlight sand. These, Aurelian announced with a flourish, are all for you. Kieran blinked at the mountain of gifts. You make it sound like you married a magpie. You're worse, Aurelian replied solemnly. You're my alpha. You deserve everything. Kieran tried to roll his eyes, but his lips betrayed him with a twitch of a smile. 1 month later, Kieran had grown suspicious of his constant nausea and strange cravings. When the physician confirmed it, he nearly choked on his tea. Pregnant? He exclaimed. Yes, the physician said politely, though his eyes darted nervously toward Aurelian, who was radiating smug satisfaction beside him. Kieran rounded on his husband. This is your fault. Aurelian, without an ounce of shame, cupped his chin and kissed him softly. Indeed, and my greatest achievement. Kieran smacked him with a pillow. The overprotective madness. From that moment, Aurelian's territorial nature ascended to godlike levels. He banned visitors unless he personally approved them. He ordered the kitchen to prepare 3 separate menus a day to satisfy every possible craving. He commissioned a nursery wing, not a room, a wing, filled with golden cradles, enchanted mobiles, and silk curtains. Worst of all, he assigned guards to follow Kieran everywhere. Kieran stormed into the library one afternoon, trailed by 2 armored men. This is absurd. I'm pregnant, not a criminal. You are carrying my heir, Aurelian said calmly, sipping tea. The guards stay. They follow me to the bathroom. Then they are doing their duty admirably. Kieran nearly threw a book at him. Domestic chaos. Meals were the worst. Aurelian insisted on hand-feeding him no matter how much Kieran protested. I have hands, Kieran grumbled, eyeing the spoonful of soup hovering in front of his face. And yet mine are superior, Aurelian replied with aristocratic calm. Kieran opened his mouth only to mutter around the spoon, I'm plotting your murder. I'll die happily, Aurelian murmured, dabbing the corner of Kieran's lips with a silk handkerchief. Kieran glared, chewing aggressively, and began mentally drafting essays titled 100 Ways to Kill an Overbearing Enigma Husband. Unfortunately, every attempt at revenge ended with Aurelian kissing his marked neck until Kieran forgot what he was mad about. Possession wrapped in love. At night, when the mansion was quiet, Aurelian held him close, his hand resting protectively over Kieran's stomach. You are mine, he whispered against his hair. You, our child, everything. No monastery, no world, could take you from me now. Kieran, cheeks hot, grumbled something sarcastic like, at least you don't need to bribe half the kingdom again. Aurelian chuckled softly, kissing the bond mark. I would burn the kingdom for you if I had to. And though Kieran pretended to roll his eyes, his hand curled over Aurelian's, secretly comforted by the madness. The Darkor Manor had become a fortress, not of stone, but of obsession, sarcasm, and relentless devotion. And though Kieran vowed he would take revenge for being bitten like a dog, he couldn't deny one thing. Being Aurelian's obsession was exhausting, but it wasn't lonely. Chapter 5. The Twist and Happy Ending. The manor was unusually quiet that evening, though Kieran did not trust it for a second. Silence in the Darkor estate usually meant Aurelian was plotting something outrageous. Last time it had been the relocation of an entire apothecary into their west wing, because Kieran sneezed twice in a row. Now, waddling through the hallway with a hand pressed to his swollen belly, Kieran frowned at the sudden absence of chaos. It had been nearly 9 months since Aurelian had branded his neck with that possessive bite on their anniversary night. 9 months of suffocating care, relentless affection, and endless banter. 9 months of Kieran swearing to every god in the heavens that he would strangle his husband with a velvet curtain, if only he didn't secretly enjoy being spoiled rotten. Tonight, however, Aurelian was missing, again. The same suspicion that had gnawed at him months ago returned with teeth. Secret late-night departures, cryptic parcels, whispers behind closed doors. Even with a child inside him now, Kieran's pride never allowed him to demand an explanation. And then Aurelian returned. Come, Aurelian commanded, in his smooth, aristocratic drawl, sweeping Kieran into his arms before he could protest. Your anniversary gift is ready. I already have my gift, Kieran muttered, gesturing to his stomach. And it kicks. But Aurelian only smirked, carrying him down the grand hallway. At the end of the corridor, he threw open gilded doors. Kieran gasped. It wasn't a ballroom, as he expected, nor was it some ridiculous shrine to himself. Aurelian had attempted that once. Instead, it was a vast, towering library, walls upon walls lined with ancient tomes, manuscripts, scrolls, and even rare first editions Kieran had once sighed over in his academy days. A golden chandelier illuminated the space, and ladders stretched high toward shelves filled with treasures of knowledge. You've been... Kieran swallowed, unable to stop the sting in his eyes. This whole time you've been building me this? Aurelian kissed his neck gently, right over the scar of the permanent mark. Every secret meeting, every late-night errand. Not lovers, Kieran. Never lovers. Only books. Only you. Kieran let out a shaky laugh, wiping furiously at his face as if tears betrayed him. So I've been sulking for months thinking you were sneaking around with someone while you were, what, bargaining with monks for dusty manuscripts? Threatening them, actually, Aurelian corrected smoothly. Some of those monks drove a hard bargain. Fortunately, I drove harder. Kieran groaned, hiding his face in his hands. I'm married to a madman. And bound to him forever, Aurelian murmured against his skin, teeth grazing the mark. You can never run again. Maybe I wouldn't have tried in the first place if you explained like a normal person, Kieran snapped, though he was still crying. But then, Aurelian whispered smugly, I would not have been able to see this face, my brilliant, stubborn scholar undone with tears because of me. Kieran shoved him, scowling through the warmth spreading in his chest. Insufferable. They spent the night in the library, bickering, laughing, and kissing between the shelves. Aurelian insisted on carrying Kieran up every ladder. "My husband is too precious to climb," which ended with a half-hour argument and Kieran threatening divorce at least 5 times. And then, weeks later, their child was born. A boy, their son, Lucien d'Harcourt, whose first cry shook the manor as surely as thunder. Aurelian wept openly, clutching both his husband and their newborn like priceless treasures. Kieran, exhausted, muttered dryly, "Congratulations, Marquis. Now you have 2 creatures to obsess over instead of 1. Aurelian pressed a kiss to his bonded Mark and whispered, "3, actually. You, him, and the future I will build for both of you." True to his word, months later Aurelian unveiled yet another surprise. Not just a library, but an entire university in Kieran's name. So the scholar could finally teach, surrounded by books and bright young minds. And so their life continued, chaotic, loud, full of sarcastic banter and ridiculous luxury. Kieran often threatened to leave, but always fell asleep tangled in Aurelian's arms. Aurelian, territorial as ever, never let go. Because love, for them, was exactly this: chaos, banter, sarcasm, possession, and now family.